We haven't been live since 2019 conference, where we were actually allowed to be in person and see people. If you were there and you're back, very excited to have you back. For anybody who wasn't there, but you are here now, very excited to have you here as well. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be great. My name is Luis, and I am your host for this evening. I'm head of product design at Wildy, meaning that I'm working very closely with designers and the development team, building and delivering all sorts of digital stuff, techie things, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. So I worked on quite a few projects over the last few years in relation to design systems, and I've also hosted a Q&A session during our last Design System London conference. So we are in a very good company here today. I've got some fantastic speakers with me who have prepared some amazing talks. And this is one of the really bonuses of my role, is that I get to be part of this community events, part of meetups, webinars, conferences, and internal learning lunches, etc. So fantastic. As you can probably understand, very excited to be here. And as I said, we got some awesome people waiting to give us some fantastic talks. The topics today, everything from you don't need to solve a problem twice, you just need a design system, how the industry went from what's a design system to yes, we have a few of those, evolution of design system KPIs, and design systems from consultant to client. To me, it sounds like we're all going to learn a lot, and I think there's going to be some fantastic takeaways this evening. Before we get started, I want to do some quick logistics. We wouldn't be a real online event unless we did that. First of all, I just want to briefly mention the code of conduct, which you should be able to find on the YouTube page. It's pretty standard stuff. Just keep your language clean, be kind to each other, and don't share anything inappropriate. And just kind of general good life advice, I guess. For those of you who have not explored the web platform or the sort of YouTube platform yet, I'm sure you're very familiar with it, but there is a section for conversation. You might be asked to create a quick account to be able to comment and ask questions, but that's absolutely fine. If you want to ask questions regarding the talks to the speakers, we actually have a Slido that we have prepared, a Slido link, which you should also be able to find just on the YouTube page there. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end for most speakers, so fire away any questions you might have. And of course, we need to mention social media, because otherwise people will know that we exist. So make sure that you tweet, and anything that your favorite learnings, quotes, anything at all, use the hashtags, hashtag DSL and hashtag design system. If you're not already following us, make sure that you do on @DSLConf, which we set up for the conference, but it works wonderfully for this one as well. Just a quick reminder of who we are, and you would have thought maybe all of you know, but considering you're all here, but just a quick reminder. So DSL, Design System London, we used to be known as a Digital Product London, but after our big conference, we changed name to sort of Design System London, because that's mainly what we're focusing on. It doesn't mean that we're only focusing on design systems. We are exploring a lot of different topics as well, and we welcome speakers with different product and development topics. We try to gather product minds to explore and explain and discuss challenging concepts within product design and engineering culture. And as I said, over the last sort of probably a couple of years, we've been focusing mainly on design systems. If you want to bring your organization closer to our community, and maybe you want to host an event in the future once we are allowed to be in person again, or maybe you want to speak, please let us know. For anyone who feels that they are ready to speak, we welcome new speakers as well as more seasoned speakers. We will be sharing information about how you can apply to talk in the future. We welcome speakers from anywhere in the world for our online events, of course. Now we're going to have a quick word from our sponsors. So I'm very happy to say that Design System London Events is organized and supported by Wildy. So it'd be a good time to let somebody from Wildy in. I believe that we have Maria Luis on the line. You would like to say some quick words?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you, Luis, for that intro. As Luis said, I'm Maria. I'm part of the talent and people team from Wildy, this event sponsor. Just wanted to give you all a very brief introduction on who we are before our awesome talks. So YLD is basically a software engineering and product design consultancy. We work with quite a big range of diverse clients on different projects, while our goal is to help them improve their digital and technical skills. We are able to do this thanks to our collaborative teams of software engineering, product design, QA, and platform. Our teams are always focused on finding the most creative and new ways possible to help our clients while sharing their knowledge. That's why you also can see us sponsoring events such as this one. We're also always looking for software engineers. And actually, at the moment, we are also looking to hire both platform engineers and UX, UI product designers to integrate our permanent teams. Regarding the product design role, as it seems fit for this event, I can tell you that this person can be either London or Portugal based. But you can, besides speaking with me directly through here or via LinkedIn, you can always see these roles directly on our LinkedIn page or on our website. And even if you're just curious and want to have a chat, I'm completely available. You can feel free to reach me out on any of these platforms. Just a bit of a side note, when you go to our website to see the product designer role, don't mind the title. We're not looking for contractors, but we're looking for someone to fill in our perm roles. And I think, yeah, that's it for me, Luis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. So yes, if you are looking for a new role, definitely reach out. One thing we want to do before we move on to our speakers, I just wanted to check a little bit because I'm looking in the chat here and it's interesting to see people where they're from. So we have some people from Design System France. So hello from Paris. Thank you for joining and welcome. Design System Advocate Gina, amazing to see you here. Fantastic. People want to tell us where you're from. Personally, I'm based in London. I know that people on this call, our speakers are sort of based across various places of UK. But last time when we did have an online event, we were talking React at that time. We had people from all over the world. So don't be shy. Share in the chat where in the world you're based, just so we get an idea, because it's always exciting to see. Now, I think it's time for us to meet our speakers. As I said, there are some fabulous people with some fantastic presentations. So I want to welcome in Marta, Benny, Ellis, James, and Emily. So all of a sudden, we're going to have everybody on the call. Hello, Benny. Hello, everyone else. Oh, there we go. Ellis is here, Marta's here, Emily here, and James. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. So before we start with the talks themselves, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to just say hi to all our listeners and to tell us a little bit about how you're feeling right now, where are you based, what are you doing, what are you working on, anything exciting for the holiday season. I see that we got some holiday festive spirit representation. So I'm going to start with you, Benny. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, thank you. December is the time for holiday spirit of whatever kind. I never pass up an opportunity to dress up. So hi everyone. I'm seeing that some more Christmas jumpers appeared as well.
Fantastic, excellent. Thank you, Benny. Yes, we do have a Christmas jumper. Let's move over to Christmas jumper. Emily, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I feel like I'm really revealing inner secrets about myself that I'm obsessed with Louis Theroux dashing through the snow. Classic Christmas jumper. Yes, I'm really well, thank you.
Fantastic. And where are you based, Emily?
So I'm based in Manchester and I'm a product designer for Zego.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you for being here. You're doing a shared presentation with James. So I think this big good opportunity to say hi to James.
Hello.
And where are you based, James?
So I want to say I'm London based, but that's actually no longer the case. I'm currently based in lovely Bath, Somerset.
Fantastic. Awesome. And what are you working on at the moment?
Well, I mean, in terms of what I've been working on most recently, you'll hear about it kind of imminently in my talk. So I won't spoil it yet, but I can confirm it involves establishing a design system.
Oh, fantastic.
Leave it at
that. Okay, I'll try to contain my excitement and look forward to that. That's going to be awesome. Then next one to say hello to, I think, is Ellis. Hello, Ellis, come in.
Hey, how are you?
Very well. How are you doing?
All good, thank you. Yeah, we had our team Christmas party last night, so unfortunate timing, I think. But
maybe it was unfortunate timing, maybe it was perfect timing. I mean,
let's find out.
Maybe you're not allowed any more Christmas parties now. And where are you based?
I'm based in London. Yeah,
you're based in London,
in Southwest London. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic, excellent. And last but not least, Marta, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, and you?
Yeah, great, thank you. Where are you based, Marta?
I'm based in Portugal, in Porto.
In Porto, fantastic.
Yeah.
And what are you looking forward to the festive season? What are you up to?
Taking a week to relax with my family.
Do you know what? I can share. I sense that the same for me. Can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So now you have all meta speakers. One thing that I did sort of ask all of you to think about beforehand is I wanted to talk a little bit about anyone who joined us on React, you will recognize this question, but basically I think that there's been a lot of things happening over the last 2 years now. And I know we keep on saying year and a half, but it's coming up to 2 years now. And some of that stuff has been positive for some people. I think we need to try to find some kind of positive things from it. And for me, one thing that I have discovered personally over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, is that I can do my job from remotely. This is probably something that maybe if we have any engineers in the audience, they think like, oh yeah, we've always been able to do that. But as somebody who works in product and design, I think up to now, I sort of had it in my head that maybe that was harder, or maybe it wasn't as easy, or maybe it was almost impossible. But that has definitely changed that mindset of it's, I can definitely do my job remotely, and that has been fantastic. I also feel like working for a company where I have offices in different places, it actually feels like we all now equally far from each other or equally close to each other, no matter what office you're working in, because we all in the same sort of remote space. And the last thing I would say as well is that someone who's looking to hire people, just being able to broaden that pool of people to be able to hire people from everywhere has been fantastic. So that was my positive takeaways from the period. So I want to hear a little bit about our speakers. So I'm going to go back to you, Benny. Is there anything that happened over the last year and a half, 2 years that you sort of think, actually, maybe there's a silver lining?
I mean, I was quite lucky. I met my future husband at Zego. So he's actually over there. He's currently getting really red in the face. So yeah, I can't complain very much.
Well, that's definitely a silver lining.
Thank you. But also, yeah, I do like how lockdown times democratized and leveled the playing field, how suddenly we found ourselves all at home. Like you could be the CEO, you could be the VP of product, or you could be the new junior designers. We all knew where we were the night before. And we were home watching TV probably. So exactly. there is something there that I actually quite enjoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sort of leveling that playing field is absolutely true. It's equal for everybody. Excellent, thank you, Benny. James, going over to you randomly. Can you think of?
I mean, for me, I think it's just broadly the kind of flexibility of remote working has been really liberating, which sounds a bit counterintuitive to say anything's been liberating over the last 18 months, but like I've been able to move out of London, move closer to my parents, get a job, get a dog, and still keep a job that I'm happy in, which wouldn't have actually really been collectively possible before. So I think just that kind of choice and flexibility is something that I don't think I could ever go back from, to be honest.
Fantastic, brilliant. And I mean, getting a dog. Can't be anything wrong with that. That just sounds fabulous. Ellis, what can you think of?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say very similar to what James said, to be honest. You know, I'm probably a little bit behind James in the whole moving out of London thing. But, you know, my girlfriend and I would love to move to Bristol in the west of England. We'd love to get a dog at some point as well. So it's you know, removing that stress of having to find a new job if you want to move, I think is a big plus.
Excellent. Absolutely. Definitely. And Marta, for you?
Yeah, for me, I joined a new company. So I asked, since I'm already working from home, why not open to another possibilities? Since before I was always looking for companies that had an office here in the city. So I've joined SingleStore and it has been an amazing experience so far.
Brilliant. Absolutely. So it's like in the same way that we are looking for people everywhere, we can also look for work everywhere. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Emily.
Fairly similar sentiment from me as well, really. I think just from saving time of not having to commute gave me a bit of time to really assess what I wanted from my career going forward, and then opened up quite a lot of opportunities. So similar to Marta, I joined Zego just over 6 months ago. So during the pandemic, I'm based in Manchester and they're based in London. So without, I think, the pandemic and everyone switching to remote working, that possibility would have been potentially still possible, but much further away than now. So yeah, I feel quite fortunate, really.
Fantastic. Okay, so the whole thing of being working remote turns out that maybe it's not such a terrible idea after all for designers. So that's good to hear. And obviously we have an engineer as well, so which I'm excited that we have both engineers and designers and product people. It's all very good. Okay, then, in that case, we have now got to know a little bit more about the speakers. We are going to move into the talks themselves. So thank you, speakers, for now. I'll call you back in when we are ready. Before we get going, I'm just taking a quick look at the chat, and it is pretty cool because we have hello from Portugal, we have hello from Hampshire in the UK, from France again, London, obviously quite a lot from London, Manchester, California, which I think is pretty cool. Somebody else from Bath getting a woohoo. Hey from Stockholm, Sweden. Hey. I'm actually Swedish, so I'm going to say hey back. So this is awesome. And I see also that we have some of our previous speakers from our conference on the call as well, who are ready to learn. I see that somebody's got a setup on the big TV, sitting back with a cup of tea and ready to learn. And I think that's absolutely fantastic, Sean. So for Sean and everybody else who are ready to learn, let's get on with our speakers and let's call our first speaker in. And we are going to hear from Marta first. Hello, welcome back, Marta. I'm going to hand over to you. The digital stage is all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. I'm now sharing my screen, so I'm assuming you can see it. Okay, perfect, thanks. So hi everyone, I'm Marta, I'm a software engineer at SingleStore, and today my talk is called You Don't Need to Solve Problems Twice, You Need a Design System. Okay, so the plan for today is to get started with a simple definition of a design system, followed by some tools, then some focus on works and process, and lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to implement a library with shared resources. Okay, so what is a design system? A design system doesn't have a very strict definition. So I think according to your background, you may define it differently. For instance, designers may define the design system as UI standards or as a style guide, while developers can define it like the UI specs or the assets for the project. But at the end of the day, a design system is documentation for everybody in the team, for designers, for developers, for product managers, to everyone. there are a lot of tools that help us dealing with design systems, and I think I can split the tools into two big groups. The first one are the tools used for planning. So when we need to plan a design system, we usually use this kind of tools. We have Sketch, we have InVision, Figma. I think these are the most known ones. And these tools are mostly prototyping tools. So they are editors based on vector graphics, and they allow us to plan and to do some mock-ups of the application, and they work as a static documentation. On the other hand, for implementation, we have Storybook, Bit, or Zeppelin, and these tools are mainly code-based. That's why they are used by developers, and they are used to test components in isolation, so they don't depend on the page they are built into or on the application, and they allow us to test the component and interact with it, change its state, and that's why these kind of tools produce dynamic documentation. Okay, and there's a lot of perks and process for you to have a design system. The first one is to solve problems just once. If you implement your solution in just one place, you don't need to be duplicating the code every time you need to solve the same problem. So you can reuse your solution and have just one well-implemented solution. And this allows your product to be very consistent. So I think everyone has been in the situation that you have components that should be equal, but they are slightly different. You have like a button with a larger margin in one page and then in the other page. So if you are using the same component in every page, the components should look equal. Another thing is the connection. So if you have a library for your design system, everything will be connected. So this can either be good or bad. It's good if you actually want to change everything. This is very useful for changing schema colors or font family or anything across the applications. But on the other hand, if you change anything, you have to be aware that it will change everywhere. So this, you have to be cautious with that. Another perk is to have just a single source of truth. Having this design system as a single source of truth improve how the team communicates, how the team shares information. So design system is above all a shared language. So we know that the communication between designers and developers is not always seamless. So having a single source of truth definitely helps this. Reviews are also easier because designers just need to review the component in one place. They don't need to review it everywhere where it is implemented. So it's much more easier for them. They just review the component once and trust the component will look like in everywhere. So for developers as well, they know that they are using the right and the most updated version. So they don't fall in a situation of implementing an outdated version or of not knowing the specs and having to select the designer to ask. So there are a lot of perks here. Okay, the process of developing a design system, you need to focus, you need to give the importance the design system deserves. You need to allocate time and resources because the design system is itself a project. You need to bear that in mind. And because you will always need to iterate, redesign, and the process will be an ongoing process, and it actually never ends. Don't expect the design system to be finished from one day to another because it really needs to grow along your projects and along your company. So how to implement a library with shared resources? So if you want a design system to be shared across projects, the easier way is to have a dedicated project or library for it. And the perfect way to test is to use npm link. npm link creates a symlink in a design system, and you can then link your project to it. So the project will no longer look for the package online, it will consume it locally. So you can test whichever changes you are making. You can test how the design system will look in the real application. So you have real-time feedback of the changes you're making. So this is really useful. And I'm going to show you, I have here a small screen recording. I'm not brave enough to do real life demos, so okay, I have here an application and a real simple design system with a button. So if I go back to my terminal and I run npm link on the design system, it is creating the symlink. And if I link the design system to my project, I can see that now the project will not search for the package online. So if I go back to my project, I can now use my fancy button from the design system. And my application is updated. So we can now see the button. If I go to my design system and change the color of the button to a bright red, the design system will change real time as we are used to. Yeah, okay. But at the same time, my application is already mirroring the changes that were made. So this is really good to test your changes and to not have surprises when you are updating your package. So yeah, give it a try. Okay, I want to give you some feedback. At SingleStore, we have two products that share the same design system that we have in a common library. And we not only have our design system components, but we also have entire features. And this really works for us. It allows us to reuse code and to not have everything duplicated. It is also very useful to debug. So we have everything in that shared library. Okay, so today I want you to take these ideas with you. So after all, a design system is documentation. Implementing solutions in one place and having just one source of truth have a lot of perks for you and for your team. Implementing a design system is a continuous process, so it should grow along your projects and your company. And implementing a library with shared resources, it is really useful, and you can test with npm link to avoid surprises when upgrading to the latest version. So this talk was based on an article that I wrote quite a long ago. So if you found it interesting, feel free to check my Medium profile and to give me some feedback about the article. I'm also on the usual social networks, Twitter, LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me. And guess what? We're hiring at SingleStore. So if you want to work for a very cool and fast-growing database, feel free to go check out our website or reach out directly to me. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad to ask your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marta.
Thank you.
Very interesting. For those of you who do have questions for Marta, please use the Slido deck that is pinned. We're going to come back to that in the Q&A in a bit after we have completed all the talks. Okay. Before we move on, thank you again, Marta. Before we move on with the next speaker, I'm just going to revisit the chat and I am going to answer one question that we have. So what somebody was asking about YouTube the chat is for subscribers only. So there is no cost involved. It's basically just subscribing to our channel. So you just need to hit subscribe to the channel, and then you should be able to ask or chat away as you please. I also thought it would be nice to say that we have somebody from Ljubljana, Slovenia, who has also said hi in the chat, which I think is fabulous. I think it might be our first Slovenian attendee from the calls that we had previously with the other events that we've done. Canada, hello Canada, brilliant. And we also have somebody who is French, but normally based in London, but currently in the south of Portugal. So we do have people from everywhere. I just wanted to highlight that because that's what I really love about these online events. Okay, so now we are going to have our second speaker coming in, and that's going to be Benny. Benny, before, hello, hey, oh, look at that. I am, every time I see you on screen, I just love the Christmas hat. I just love it. It's like festive season galore. So Benny, I know for a fact that you have a different thing that you have to rush off to, so you might not be able to attend the Q&A. So I'm going to make an exception for Benny today. After her talk, we're going to give a little bit of time for 1 or 2 questions directly at Benny, so you do get a chance as well. But enough about that now. Handing over to you. The digital stage is yours, Benny. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, let me see how to do this without screwing it up. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna go into presentation mode. And are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, we are indeed. Thank you.
Amazing. Hello, everyone. Okay, first things first. Good question. Who am I? Hi, I'm Benny. I've been a designer for many years, touching lots of different disciplines. No reason to get into it. I'm currently the director of product design at Pearson Education, but I have not passed probation yet. So if you feel like sending me good vibes, feel free. I am, the things that I'm mostly known for are having bunnies and how much I love talking about bunnies and showing them on camera during meetings, but you're not in luck today because they're sleeping. I also spent most of lockdown playing with my hair color. This was very amusing for my colleagues, or so I'm told. And third, I'm autistic and I love talking about that too. As to why I'm here, a few years ago, I built a design system for the company I was working for, Vonage, and I talked about it at a DSL meetup in New York. It was fun. That's because it was a fairly successful story, as in I was able to start it, get it integrated in most of my company's products, as well as creating a team around it that even kept it going after I left. So pat myself on the back. After that, I went to work for a startup where I witnessed the design system desperately trying to come to life over the course of almost 2 years. You will hear about that later because it looks like it's finally happening, but I learned a lot from seeing those struggles as well. And now I'm working in a massive corporation that has like 15 design systems lying around for very understandable reasons, which I will also cover. So what I'm doing now is I'm having a moment of reflection. Especially as recently something happened that I couldn't quite get out of my head. I was talking to a contractor designer who had been in the same company for quite a while. And he said something like this. He said, first thing when I joined the project, I saw that there wasn't a design system, so I created one. Now, on the surface, this seems okay. And I'm sure that there's a lot more context to this than what I got from that one conversation. However, it hit something sore and I couldn't quite get it out of my head. So what I'm going to do in this talk is take you on the journey that my brain took from here. Let's start. So he said there wasn't a design system. Now, that's very possible. Many places don't have design systems yet, like small companies or companies where design or front-end engineering came in late or wasn't a priority. That makes total sense. Maybe not a company with an extensive digital offering that has been around for many, many years and has many, many designers. Maybe they will at least have a Figma library or something. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, like what exactly did they look for and who did they ask? But that's not what was really bugging me. They also said, I created one. Now, yeah, like, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just for the sake of clarity, as we've just seen, a design system is not exactly something that you just create by yourself overnight. I stole this from Audrey Huck's article on the UX Collective because they are a much better illustrator than I am. A design system, as we've seen, comes from the alignment of a ton of elements, multiple disciplines that come together in a beautiful collection of components and patterns that exist both as design and in production-ready code. Back to the story, I did some digging and I realized that what that contractor actually meant was that they were designing components and trying to give those components to developers. They were also not having that much luck because, lo and behold, the developers already had their own library of components and weren't interested in starting from scratch. I did feel for them at that point. So, okay, all of that clarified, there was still something that I couldn't quite shake off. They said, first thing when I joined the project, I'm taking this very literally for the purpose of making a point. Let's think of AWS. AWS is an amazing supporting tool that has enabled millions of services to scale, providing an alternative to costly and clunky physical setups. It's incredible, it's great. From the perspective of the customer, though, it doesn't really matter if you use AWS or a Mac Mini in an office or a hamster on a wheel that goes really, really, really fast. From their perspective, what is important is that it works. Similarly, when it comes to design, customers don't really know if the service they're using is built on top of a very solid repo of design components that are reusable and scalable, or if there's something that manually has to go and change the hex colors of a button in every single page, as long as it works. This is where I go a little bit controversial and someone's going to flame me on LinkedIn. Sometimes the services don't even have to look that consistent throughout the journey. If you take a major product like eBay, depending on which part of the site you're on, the interface is slightly different, just similar enough not to distract, but it's clearly coming from different sets of components. And it's kind of not a problem. It's kind of enough. It's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. It works for them. It works well enough for them. What I'm trying to stress here is that we need to use critical thinking, be strategic, and set the right expectations. What is it that we want to achieve? What are we optimizing for? What problems are you trying to solve? And start solving that and see where you get to. Keep in mind all you've learned about how fantastic design systems can be when they're perfectly structured and hey, have a great governance going on. But that might be not what you need right now. Another moment of reflection, I do like my stormtroopers, apologies. I started building the design system at Vonage at the end of 2017. I was very fresh-faced and bright-eyed, and I knew nothing about anything. This was about the time where Airbnb was really pumping the hype about design, and design coming from companies that produce something else, but they really care about the experience. So it was around that time, but it was before they were really the talk of the town, design systems. You didn't get all of these articles about everything you need to know, how to sell it to stakeholders, design system 101s. That means that the job I had to do at the time was a little bit more difficult because I had less guidance. But when I look at the industry today, I started realizing that that was a bit of an advantage for me, really, because I had to do extensive research just to find out what the hell a design system even was and how and if it was going to help me. I also had to go and talk to engineers all around the company, having meaningful discussions and debates around pros and cons. And we ended up very much learning together, figuring out the problems together, rather than argue over which guideline or philosophy was the right one to follow. Basically, we made a lot of mistakes and adjusted, and the pressure was low because we were all in tune. It looked something like this. So I worked on components that were made up from existing interfaces. Then I built a proof of concept in HTML and CSS, worked with some local engineers to test it on a product. And when that was successful, we went on to scaling. And that meant establishing governance because we involved then other products and other engineering teams. And that's kind of where it started becoming a really like evolving loop. So we would scale more, meet more engineers, reassess the governance, scale more again, and so on and so forth. This basically means that we were allowed to have a period of infancy and then grow until we were a fully mature internal product. Building a design system in today's world, however, means that most designers and front-end engineers, we will at least have read articles about the importance of governance, the importance of getting buy-in from the business beforehand, which should be good, but the fact that there is such an awareness about them, it does mean that there's a lot of talk that tends to be done up front, which again should be good, but many decisions end up being taken on paper, doing desk research, going back and forth until everyone who has to dish out whatever amount of resource for this feels comfortable about the roadmap and the planning and the gains, and you can end up in this situation where you basically laid out a year of work before you actually do anything. And this conversation can really go on and on and on. It can easily be months before everyone is on the same page enough to actually start building something. And by the time you get to the first integration, it ends up being so heavily scrutinized that even if it's perfectly successful, you likely have to go back and talk to all of the people again and adjust the desk planning to what actually happened in real life, and ultimately make everyone feel comfortable about the project again. This happens with many projects. It's not special of design system, but it is something where we might fall into unaware. It happens because all of the upfront planning can give a false sense of security, a false impression that basically you can get mature from the get-go, and then it's a surprise when you still have to go through the infancy and the awkward teenage years phase. Also, it can undermine the confidence in the whole project because expectation doesn't meet reality. With some luck, eventually you can get all of this resolved and get onto scaling and maintaining. But real life situations are very complex and some expectations need to be reset as we go. I'll give you an example. So let's say the team A has a big project coming. They decide to do it right with properly laid out components from the get-go. Perfect. They involve their engineers who build React components, and it's the start of a beautiful friendship. But In every company, communication has gaps. So it turns out that Team B started building their product using adapted ant design or something because it's ready and they're in a rush. Maybe it's an engineering team working on a side project that has less design involvement. Maybe they don't have that type of research, so why not? There's nothing wrong with that. But by the time Team A is ready to extend their mature design system to the rest of the company's product, that would be a massive rewrite for Team B, who has their own roadmap to work on. And let's throw another curveball. The company decides to buy a new off-the-shelf service, which turns out to be based on material design and built in Angular. Now, the organized and efficient you is thinking, how do we conglomerate everything into a single system and a single source of truth? And the answer to that might be, it might not be worth it. It might not be worth the effort. Team A should keep going because they're doing a great job. But Team B, in these circumstances, in this environment, is also doing good. It's just that things are not that black and white. So I'm coming to a close here. What I want to clarify is that design systems are an incredible tool that enables faster and more consistent design and development of digital products. I am still a major advocate of them, and I believe that a lot of good has come from democratizing them and spreading the good work on how to get that out there. However, like any other tool, it depends how and when you use it. It depends on the circumstances and it depends on the need. It's very much a journey and you have to get there. You can't start from the end and you can't aim for perfection from the get-go. It also won't always be comfortable because there will be feedback you don't like, there will be disagreements, you might not achieve exactly what you set out to get. This is the same in every project. It's really important to be honest and keep a broader definition of success because there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Maybe you'll have to adapt an off-the-shelf design system because that's just more viable for your company. Does that mean failure? No, that's also a success. It might even be preferable because then you won't lay awake at night wondering if the micro interaction for the accordion will work in Internet Explorer 10. The one real takeaway that I have here is just an invitation to be sensible. Work with people, enjoy the journey and the learning. Don't try to anticipate the end. Adapt to what your project needs, what your team needs, what your company needs. You don't have to do what everyone else does. You have to do what's right for your situation, and that is success. And that's it from me. I hope that there was something useful in there for you, and I'll leave you with a festive puppy.
Thank you very much. I definitely think there was a lot of useful, and who doesn't love a festive puppy? That is so adorable. So cute. So as I said before, Benny, I know that you have to rush off in a minute, but one question that I had listening to you, first of all, I want to say I agree with you. I think quite often what happens is that organizations or companies or teams, they just assume that they have to have a design system because everybody else has it, and they don't do enough foundational groundwork to actually realize, are we even ready mature-wise? Do we have the capabilities? Do we even need one, etc.? But my question to you was that as somebody who has worked first sort of starting a design system, building one from the ground up, joining a company that are in the process of trying to get theirs off the ground, and now working in an organization which is very large and has many design systems on the go, even though that those scenarios are quite different, are there any sort of similarities that you see there that you have sort of can point out are quite important?
Similarities, I mean, ultimately, everyone has the same wishes. And for example, where I'm now, I know that there is a desire to be more consistent and to have one system to rule them all. It's just, it's more a wish from the company side rather than solving a customer problem. The customers are okay, or they have bigger problems. It's internally, as a measure of efficiency, it is still the wish to have one very, very smooth design system experience.
No matter whether you're a small, medium, or large size organization,
no matter. Like,
everybody just wants one design system.
Everybody just wants something
everywhere.
simple that you can come in, on board on that, and build on that, and be creative in the rest of your time.
And I think we all know that the reality does not always look that simple.
Yeah.
So as I said, because we have to let Benny go, I wanted to just quickly check if there was any questions that were directed directly at Benny from her talk. I want to give people an opportunity to, if you have a question for Benny, this is your moment, because she won't be joining us at the Q&A. In the meantime, I guess one other thing, sort of the opposite of that, of the similarities of these different ones, what would you say are your biggest differences that you see, being somebody that kind of starting something in something small and then coming in and joining something that's either halfway or there are so many going on?
I guess, so one takeaway that I had as a designer and as an ex-design system manager was I had to learn a lot about the needs of a company and how nuanced they are. Because if you put me there 3 years ago, I would have said, stop everything, we need to do this now. I had to let go of a lot of perfectionism and get a little bit more scrappy. It is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable, but ultimately it's for the greater good, and you can always try to reach a good end, but in incremental steps.
It's by learning to accept what's good enough for right now. And I think as designers, quite often we all struggle with that sort of pixel perfection. It has to be perfect. It has to be beautiful. Okay, let me see. So
stunned silence.
This is why we normally set the Q&A at the end, because every time everyone who's ever been in a live environment, do we have any questions? There is nothing. So we do have one question which might be able to sort of just touch on quickly. How do you, and we're going to come back to these questions to ask to everyone else, but this one I think may be good. So how do you find the best way to justify a design system to a very quarterly value, or let's say value-driven product team?
Efficiency. You want to be faster. You want to spend development time building what's actually important. You don't want to have to spend it to redo things that could be automated. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant tip. Okay, well, thank you so much, Benny, for taking the time to speak to us. That's awesome. Before we move on with our next speakers, I'm just going to have another little quick gander at the chat. First of all, I've seen in the deck, actually, in the Slido link, that there are some questions, and I'm excited to say I think some of those questions might be touched upon in some of the upcoming talks, and if they're not, we're going to come back to them. So please keep entering your questions in the Slido link. The fewer a design system, the bigger the community internally. Yes, I think I can agree with that. I think that sounds very sensible. So Benny mentioned a talk that she's done previously on our meetup that we had in New York. So I can see that we have shared the link to that one. So you should definitely check out that talk. And we also have some fantastic festive emojis. Okay, brilliant. I am loving this chat. It's great. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker. And that question I was just asking Benny about how we can justify design systems on something which is very value-driven. That was about product teams, but in a value-driven organization. I can't help feeling that maybe this talk will touch a little bit on that. And this is Ellis coming in to speak to us now. Hello, hey. How are you?
Not bad, thank you. Not bad.
Excellent. Great. I'm going to hand over to you. The digital stage is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Cool. Can you see my screen? Okay.
We can indeed.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellis. I am a product manager for News UK. So we've been building a design system now for around 2.5 years. You know, we have a number of different brands in the organization across News UK and News Corp. And yeah, today my talk will be on the evolution of design system KPIs. So let's get going. So what is NewsKit? NewsKit is the design system for News Corp. So we started off in summer 2019. So it's around 2.5 years old now. We have built a UI kit in Figma, and we have built up a library of React components. So I think we're sitting around 43 components at the moment, which is great. We also built a theming system. So unlike a lot of other design systems, they are generally tailored for just one brand. So, you know, if you're looking at things like Base Web, for example, that is very focused on Uber. However, we have loads of brands under the News Corp umbrella. So, you know, from The Times, The Sun to Talk Sport, Dow Jones, Factiva, and you know, dozens and dozens of brands. So we've had to build a theming system into our design system as well, which adds another string to the bow. We've got a documentation site which is publicly available. It's called newskit.co.uk, and we've been adopted by around 5 brands so far across News Corp. So that's a little bit of an intro into what our design system is. So we set out a mission when we began building the design system 2.5 years ago, and we stuck to that mission, and it's you know, continues to be our mission today. So our mission is to improve the process of product development and increase the pace of creation and innovation within digital teams. So I found this quite nice definition of a KPI from Clickfolio. So product key performance indicators are metrics that measure your product's performance. They help you understand if the product is meeting its business goals and if the product strategy is working. Without KPIs, you end up guessing how your product is performing. So I think it's really important to take a step back and realize that design systems are still products. You know, having been in talks with you know, other design system teams, it's not too common to come across a product manager within a design system, I don't think. So maybe we're slightly unique in this sense to have a product manager within our design system, but they are still products. They have a goal and they need to demonstrate value. To Louis' point earlier on, they're generally quite technical products. So, you know, maybe it's harder to define a KPI for a design system than it might be for, you know, a web product, for example, like a shop, or, you know, even some of our brands in News UK, like The Times, for example. KPIs help set the direction of travel for our design system. So by taking our time and really coming up with meaningful KPIs, what it means is that we can actually track how we're doing and not end up in a situation that Benny mentioned where there are, you know, 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different design systems within one organization, which is obviously it can be a problem. And it's also really good feedback for the design system. So to have a core set of KPIs, you know that if you've made a release and you've released a new version, and for whatever reason, the KPIs are kind of indicating that that version bump maybe was to the detriment of the users, then you know that maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. You can roll it back and you can adapt. So taking on a bit of the story and a bit of the journey, in July 2019, we had a massive restructure within News UK. So beforehand, The Sun, The Times and Wireless Group had their individual product teams looking after content, looking after user data, and looking after obviously the front end UIs. And it was, you know, a lot of inefficiency, a lot of waste was being produced, and that would obviously end up being technical debt. So we decided that we needed a design system, and the design system NewsKit was born. And from that, we are now 2.5 years later, and we've come a really, really long way. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got the product development life cycle, which is, I think, quite a nice diagram. And I'd say NewsKit now is that we are probably just past or around the introduction stage of our development life cycle. So, we had to focus on creating components and turning out components for our brands to use. And we had to focus on building the theming system. So this part of our life cycle was really focused on the foundations and laying those foundations and making sure that we do have a theming system in place, and making sure that we have enough components to fit the needs of our consumers and our brands. So we looked at, what are the core components needed to build out an article page, for example, on the Times or the Sun, and the same for the index pages as well. And that helped set our base for what we were doing back in the beginning. So, for year one, we had a really simple and, maybe not a useful KPI, but it was the number of components, and it is useful for us to be able to see the growth of the design system and to be able to say, this quarter we want to develop X amount of components. So it's something, to show that we are actually doing work. Year two. So last year in 2020, the first product built entirely using our design system was launched in Times Radio. You can see it there on the right-hand side. For the first time, since its inception, we had users, and I think all my team would agree that this time was really useful and important. We learned a lot about our system and about the direction that we needed to go in. And for the first time, we had users to get feedback off. So we sent surveys out to our users, and we captured a net promoter score from them. So this net promoter score was something used in customer service quite a lot of the time. Back in my days when I used to work at the Apple store when I was a student, we used to capture the NPS. So this is really useful to be able to say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely would you be to recommend using NewsKit to a colleague? 6 and 7, they're promoters, and then 1, 2, and 3, they are detractors. They wouldn't recommend using it, and then in between, they're passive. And we also captured a sentiment analysis as well. So on their feedback, we would run it through a sentiment analysis, and we would be able to see, okay, the sentiment towards NewsKit is good or it's bad. And it was really great to get more feedback and recommendations about what we should do and what we could maybe add into the design system. So big year for us, year two, which gave us our second KPI that we began to track, which is NPS. So at the end of year two, we had our number of components being tracked and our NPS as well. And off the back of this, we've actually gone and we do weekly user interviews with our various different product teams and speaking to engineers and designers and product people across the organization to get the feedback from them. So this year, we've had a really good year so far as a design system team. So we had a product launch, Virgin Radio. So Wireless, our kind of audio arm of the business, they've launched their new web platform, which is essentially going to underpin every single brand. So Virgin Radio, Talk Sport, Talk Radio, Talk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Dow Jones built a Factiva product, the new Factiva product, which is a B2B product entirely using NewsKit as well. So 2 big product launches, loads of good feedback coming in. So this KPI that we're looking at here is the pace of development. So with the Virgin Radio, the wireless web team built this product with the the goal to then reduce the time it would take them to build their second product. So we need to look at the pace of development. And for example, product A took X period of time to build and cost this much. However, once that was up and running, product B, which was the product that came afterwards, took this percentage less time to build and saved this much money when compared to product A. And this really put our theming system that we've built to use. And it really tested that. And, we got some really good feedback off the back of it. And, it works. It works very well. And it's really important that you do track this. It's a lot easier to do this because, they are using NewsKit in a wholesale kind of way. They're not using it incrementally. They're not, swapping out components with our design system components. They have built a brand new platform, and it is really good to see the pace of development improve. So this is something that we're tracking. We're also tracking contributions. I think everyone would agree that design systems aren't and shouldn't be owned by one team. They can be maybe set up and governed by one team. So the NewsKit team, I say we are the governors of NewsKit design system, but it's owned by everyone. It's owned by the product teams in the USA. It's belongs in the UK as well, and whoever else uses it. So contributions, we want people to be contributing back to the design system. And initially we were really gunning for teams to contribute components back, because obviously then that will really help us scale our component library. But it soon became obvious and clear that was maybe quite a big ask, because they've got to get familiar with the design system, they've got to onboard onto it. So we actually began to relax our kind of what we mean by contributions, and we're looking at things like patterns. So for example, here on the left hand side, you can see that we've got this onboarding pattern, which will live on the NewsKit website as well. So we're looking at design teams and saying, if you come up with a pattern, please contribute it back, please get it onto the website. We're looking at component specifications and design. So, we can build the components, but it'd be great that if you want an accordion component, can you spec it out for us? And can you contribute that specification back to the NewsKit team to build? Contribution in Figma and bug fixes in code. So we've had a really, we found that it's a lot easier to get contributions in these ways, and it's a really good way to be able to track your kind of adoption and a sentiment towards your design system. Another KPI that we're tracking is performance. So we are tracking the adoption of NewsKit over time. So there's a really good blog post by Cristiano Rastelli, who was formerly of Badoo, who are the people who built Bumble, the dating app. He wrote a really great piece on the adoption of design systems and how to track it in code, which is really cool. So we have built this design system, as everyone does, with performance, accessibility, and SEO all in mind. So we are going to be working on a new KPI that tracks the adoption as a percentage in a code base to then be against the Core Web Vital score. So the idea being is that we would hope and expect to see a increase in adoption, and then as that adoption increases, the Google Core Web Vitals improve, because these components have been built to a really high spec. We're not building them in a day. We're spending some time to make sure that we are getting them right. So that meant now, 2.5 years in, we've got a really great core set of KPIs. And these KPIs don't always have relevance to every single product. It might be that a team who is incrementally adopting NewsKit, so they're swapping out components, they're building new features on their site with the design system, they might not be able to look at the pace of development and the money saved as easily as, for example, wireless, where they're building a whole brand new product and launching these products one after another. However, they can look at the performance and the adoption versus the Core Web Vital score when a brand like the Times or the Sun are implementing NewsKit into their system. We should hopefully see that score improve. So you can't compare apples with oranges. So it's use these KPIs as and when you see fit. They're not going to be relevant to every single product. So to summarize, we've got a nice core set of KPIs. We've got the number of components. We've got the net promoter score. We've got the pace of development, which is pounds saved. We've got contributions, which helps measure the buy-in for your design system. We've got the adoption in code, and we've got the adoption versus the core web vital score. So it's a really useful way to prove the value of the design system through real tangible numbers. And then, what's next? We are open sourcing our design system this year. So in the next coming weeks, we will be looking to do this over Christmas. We are looking at multi-platform support. So we get asked all the time, what are you doing about apps? And it's, we need to do it. We need to look into that and at least have a strategy for that. So if anyone's got any, recommendations or is available to have a chat about that, then please do talk to us. We'd love to know your experience. We're going to continue to build on our library. We're adding motion into our design system. We are adding the versioning to our NewsKit website so that consumers can see the documentation that's relevant to them, depending on which version of NewsKit they're running. And we're continuing to improve our doc site, which is built out entirely using our NewsKit design system. So it's a good way to dog food our component library and our systems. Some further reading. So we've got the documentation site. We've got a Medium blog as well, where I wrote a piece on this exact topic. So go and have a read of that for a bit more detail. And then we've got a video from where Nick and James, two of our design colleagues, met up with Charlie from Figma and did a coffee with Charlie session. And I'm on all the socials, as you can see as well. And that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's a lot. I've got a lot of I think that was really great. I've got some really good insights from there, and I've got some good follow-up questions, which I'm excited to ask you in the Q&A later. Thank you so much, Alice. If you are looking at this and going, oh, I also have lots of questions, please use the Slido deck and pop your questions in there. It's going to be a really good Q&A session. I'm pretty sure of it. Jumping quickly back into the chat, we now got Auckland, New Zealand. Good morning, and greetings from Greece. So it's expanding. Love it. Absolutely amazing. We've had some amazing talks, but we're not done yet. We've got another one coming up. I mean, we are spoiling everyone today, and we are so excited that we come back with such great speakers and talks. So for our last outing, I would like to welcome our double duo, James and Emily, who are going to be talking to us about handover to a certain extent, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct.
Fantastic. I welcome both of you. How are you both feeling?
Really well, thank you.
Excellent. Ready to go. Okay, brilliant. I hand over to you. It's all yours. Take it away.
Great. Cool. Can you see presentation?
We can indeed.
Fantastic. Yeah, so hello everybody, and thanks for sticking around. Welcome to our talk, Design Systems from Consultants to Clients. My name is James, and I'm a the consultancy YLD.
And hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here and to be sharing some of my experience with you all. As I mentioned earlier, my name's Emily and I'm a product designer at the motor insurance provider Zego.
And today we want to talk about designer handoff, specifically our experience in handing off a design system between a consultant and an in-house designer.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by giving a little bit of context and background behind the relationship between Zego and YLD and how James and I came to work together. So Zego partnered with YLD back in May of this year to essentially consolidate all of the ideas that we had for our product and translate those into one cohesive North Star vision that all of our teams could align with and get behind. In order to achieve that North Star vision, both effectively and at speed, our design and engineering teams at Zego needed to be equipped with a design system. That would allow us to not only focus on improving our current customer journeys, but also give us the opportunity to experiment and test more efficiently.
So while the Zego design team continued to address the day-to-day needs of the product, myself and two other consultants from YLD set to work on building the North Star and accompanying design system. I led the establishment of the design system from the YLD side.
Then I eventually took on responsibility for the design system on behalf of Zego's internal design team.
So going into the project, both YLD and Zego had corresponding objectives and expectations of what they wanted to achieve. For YLD, our objective was to seamlessly embed ourselves into Zego and eventually leave behind not only the solutions that we've already outlined, but also the requisite capabilities and confidence within Zego to build on our foundations.
And at Zego, our expectations were very similar. Ultimately, we needed to end the project with a team that felt comfortable in navigating around and implementing the design system without the need for support from the YLD team. So having a structure that was intuitive was really important. We also needed it to enable an efficient way of working for the team while maintaining consistency. So in order to achieve that, we expected YLD to take some time to really get to know us as individuals, as a team and as a business, and really understand those nuances. And then ultimately, we needed this design system to empower our teams to not only reach that North Star vision that I mentioned before, both successfully and quickly, but also give us the space and the opportunity to innovate, experiment, and validate these ideas and concepts by being able to work at prototypes quickly.
So our expectations and objectives were fairly well aligned, but it was clear that the project really hinged on getting the handoff part of it right, particularly if we were going to deliver something that was actually an intuitive, empowering and long-term solution for Zego. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that designer handoff in general can be a fairly intricate process at the best of times, and it is further complicated when a design system is involved. It can be pretty ominous actually handing over the reins to something that you've raised from a humble collection of atoms to a sprawling network of molecules and organisms, and even more ominous being the one picking up the reins to an entirely new system. So it should come as no surprise that Emily and myself both had some initial concerns and reservations regarding the design system and its handoff. Firstly, from my perspective, it was actually really important that the design system structure and its conventions were not too subjective to my own way of working, and that it was able to seamlessly align with Zego's. Following on from that, as the design system was being created in a semi-silo way, I was also aware that this could result in us being kind of too close to the work to see potential issues, inconsistencies, or specific product considerations that might be immediately apparent to Zego. And additionally, as the design system would be used by various teams working on different platforms across the organization, I knew we had to take steps that would reduce cognitive load and streamline decision-making. And then in terms of the practical side of the handoff, I was very conscious of knowledge being lost, but I was also aware that if the handoff was too much of a brain dump, then it could lead to information overload.
Yeah, and for me, I must admit, as James mentioned, it was quite a daunting prospect taking on such a huge and significant project and making sure that the handover process was smooth and comprehensive. But some of the specific reservations that I had going into the project were, number one, just how enormous it was. And it was quite scary to begin with, I can't lie. I'm sure many of you, if not everyone on the call, has had interaction with design systems in the past. So know that they're really complex things with lots of intricately linked atoms and molecules. And it just takes a lot of time to truly get to understand all of that complexity. And then yet more time on top of that to understand how to maintain, build and modify within that complex network. So I was very aware that it was going to take me some time to really understand all this complexity and whether we just frankly have enough time to do that. Then, as well as that, it was how the hell am I going to squeeze all of the knowledge that's in James's brain and absorb as much of that as I possibly could within the 2 months handover period that we had. No one knows this design system quite like James, and I was very aware that we needed to protect all of that knowledge and make sure that we didn't lose it when he left the project. So it was my job to poke and prod him with loads of questions to try and pass on as much of that expert knowledge as possible, which I'm sure James thoroughly enjoyed. I was also really keen to work with James to collate some documentation and get all of this knowledge down on virtual paper, not only for my benefit, but also for the benefit of the wider team, to make sure that everyone had a base level of understanding and that the sharing wasn't just with me. And then my final reservation might be quite specific to me and kind of my personality, because I'm a horrible overthinker, but it was making sure that I was very thoughtful and sensitive going into this handover. I was uber aware that this was James's baby that he'd been working on for months, and he'd nurtured it from some humble atoms. And it was basically my job to come on board and tear it apart, try and find holes in it, to make sure that I understood it properly, but also to test the comprehensiveness of the design system itself. So it was really important to me that I do this in a constructive and thoughtful way, because ultimately James and I were going to be working together for a couple of months, and we needed to establish a positive working relationship and really build those foundations for sharing and collaboration.
So how did we address these concerns and reservations? Well, we were able to respond to them through a combination of iteratively adjusting our design system setup in Figma and in implementing various different rituals throughout the handoff. So let's just take a quick look at some of the simple adjustments and improvements that we made to our Figma setup over the course of our handoff. The first thing is that we all know as designers it can be a struggle to agree upon naming conventions. So one of the ways we found around this was to actually group our components by their function first, which really helped to alleviate confusion. With this structure, designers were basically able to narrow down their desired component based on function, which was a lot less subjective than a name. And as a result, we chose to group all of our components by the following functions: base, buttons, displays, feedback, filters, inputs, and navigation. Now, as the design system began to get more complex, we also found that as useful as something like Figma variants can be, it's really important to consider when they're actually helpful and then when they're a hindrance, and to ensure that any usage of them is consistent and obvious. What we found was that certain variants became lost or their existence required assumed knowledge. So we trimmed down the majority of our variant options to just include things like device, position, type, state, and size, so that designers knew exactly what kind of variants to expect with components. And lastly, one of the smaller tweaks that we made that actually had quite a large impact was around color. So Zego's design system made use of quite a lot of different colors, and their usage was fairly broad. So we found that grouping and naming our colors to give context to their correct usage allowed for greater clarity over what was standardized and what wasn't, thereby reducing a lot of the decision making. So rather than just having our colors labeled as like neutral, 30, 20, 10, for example, we actually created a separate color style in Figma for our text, our iconography, our backgrounds, and our border elements. And then within them, we actually included all the potential colors relating to that specific element. So for example, in our text color style, we included things like text primary, text disabled, text link, and so on. So it was much quicker and easier to be consistent with color. Now let's take a look at some of the rituals that we implemented during the handoff. So from my side, one of the key things was to actually conduct a soft launch of the design system with a select number of designers and engineers before we launched it across the wider organization. This actually presented a great opportunity for Zego to raise questions, but it also presented the opportunity to disprove some of my own assumptions about the design system. Now, that being said, it was also really important that we maintain some high visibility on the progress being made on the design system across Zego. So to do this, we frequently showcased updates in design reviews, and we pushed out written updates via a dedicated design system Slack channel. Now, sometimes showing people isn't enough, and it's actually better to familiarize them by doing. So once the design system was at a mature enough level, we actually ran an interactive design along workshop with the wider Zego team, where we set about creating some screens using the design system. And this really helped to actually familiarize people with some of the basic structure, and again, presented another opportunity for questions to be raised. Finally, it was actually really important to bear in mind that people won't always remember all the rules and regulations of a design system. So we tried to keep it to just a few kind of distinct rules, things like our atomic approach, as we've already touched on, or using 4-point grids for a kind of more consistent structure. And then we ensured that everything else was actually more documented in depth separately.
For me, some of the things that I found to be really useful and really effective over the handover period was, firstly, just not to dive in head first and start with the most complicated thing that I wanted to have achieved by the end of the handover period. That's a surefire way to just completely overwhelm yourself and not want to engage with the design system. So my best piece of advice is just to start by getting familiar with the file itself. Just have a nosy around, see what's in there, get familiar with what's included and the layout. And then from there, start by adding something small. So I think the first thing that I added was an icon. It was a really nice way to get familiar with, obviously, the rules around how we want to create icons themselves, but then the sizing conventions, naming conventions, how they then engage with colors and that sort of thing. So it was great to then get familiar with the rules and the conventions and compound my understanding of the basics, and then build up my confidence to add something a bit more complex after that. Then the second thing comes quite naturally to me as a product designer, but just to really release your inner toddler and keep asking why about absolutely everything, which again, sometimes you can feel a little bit awkward doing that, but it's really important that you understand why decisions have been made and interrogate that rationale, because we've got to use that same rationale going forward. So if you don't understand what thinking has been done before, you can't maintain that same thinking going forward. And then not only, I guess in my case, asking James these questions, but once I felt more comfortable with the design system, it was asking myself the questions that I was facing and kind of challenging myself to go away and dig into the design system to find the answer. Then also coming on to the project, I think design systems can feel quite theoretical and abstract in isolation, even though, of course, their real life use cases when they're being built are closely considered. But I found it really useful to work up some of the pages that we had live on the website using the new design system. For me, it made it really clear if something was unclear in the design system or if we needed to modify or add a component. It also helps to naturally raise questions that you might not otherwise come across until after the handover, which obviously wouldn't be ideal. And then finally, again, this one might be quite specific to me. I'm a really list-orientated person. I love being organised and structured, so it's no surprise that I fell in love with the design system and all of that, what that involves. But when James and I started to work together, I created a rolling checklist of things that I wanted to achieve by the end of the handover. It was a really nice proactive way to be constantly engaging with the design system, making sure that I was up to date with the latest, what was going on. And one of the things that I had on my list was that I wanted to create a complex organism made up of multiple atoms and molecules. For my own self-confidence, I kind of needed to know that if I could do that with the backup of having Wildy and James's support, then there's no reason why I couldn't do it after the handover either. And it was great to have kind of a tangible to-do list, if you like, that I could tick off as we were working together. And then James and I could both reflect on that list at the end of the handover and confidently say, if everything was ticked off, that we'd covered everything that we needed to.
So we're actually coming up to the final week of our handoff, so that'll be next week. So it kind of seems like a really good opportunity for us to talk about, some of our kind of parting thoughts on the project and the handover process in general. So for me, I think while establishing the design system in a kind of semi-siloed way definitely had its challenges, I think a combination of the high visibility that we were able to impose throughout kept us on a good footing as to what was needed by Zego, and the incremental pairing work between myself and Emily throughout the soft launch in particular really helped us to actually catch a lot of the issues or inconsistencies before design system was fully available. It also ensured that the design system was fully aligned to Zego's way of working, and it left me in no doubt as to Emily excelling as the owner of the design system going forward. More broadly in recent weeks, it's been great to see more designers beginning to familiarize themselves with the initial design system with minimal fuss or confusion. And we've already seen some conversations emerging about how the design system can grow and mature across Zego, which is great to see that it's already being embraced by the wider team in its fledgling form.
Yeah, and for me, it's been a super cool experience and I've learned absolutely loads. Having the scenario of working really closely with an external designer is not an experience I've ever had before. So that's been really interesting, really fun, And hopefully you can tell from this presentation, it's been really successful as well, which is obviously very important. And two of the key things that I'm going to take away from this experience and definitely carry forward into future projects is, number one, just how important it was to take a considered approach from both sides, not only in terms of communication and how James and I were going to work together. I guess ultimately remembering that we're both two human beings and we'd never worked together before, so we didn't know exactly how we worked, and just being kind of very aware and thoughtful about that. But also the practical steps that we implemented to target those initial reservations that we had. So one of those was bringing James into our team ceremonies from day dot. And that was just a brilliant way for everyone in the team to get visibility on what James was working on, latest updates, get the whole team on board and get them really excited about the new design system, which they are. They're absolutely buzzing. And many of them, as James said, have already started using it. And for me, there's no greater sign of success than if you've got a team that are really, really excited about it and they're really engaged. So, we've obviously done something right there, which is great. And then the second thing was just about allowing ourselves the time. So having this extended handover period for me was absolutely critical, not only to the success of the handover itself, but to the long-term success of implementing the design system going forward. It just gave James and I time to have one-to-ones and to truly collaborate, while also giving me critical breathing space beyond having to maintain my business as usual work. So continue to support the squads that I work with and make sure that none of that work was suffering. And as I said, it just gave me time to really build my confidence and get comfortable and familiar with the design system. And now I can safely say it feels like my baby as well. I'm incredibly protective and proud of it. And I'm really excited to take it forward into this next phase of building it and rolling it out across our interfaces. So really, really exciting. So yeah, the last thing is just to say a big thank you for listening. I hope we've given you an interesting insight into the experience of handing over a design system from consultant to client, and hopefully we've given you some useful tips.
Thank you to the both of you. Super interesting. I think there's a lot of insights there that are useful, not just from consultant to client, but as a general of handover as well. Some really, really useful stuff. So thank you. We are going to get to the Q&A in a second. Before that, I'm just going to comment a little bit on the chat again. In the meantime, the rest of the speakers, welcome back in. We have Ellis and Marta. I'm just going to have a quick look at the comments because the chat is amazing, because there's a lot of people helping each other out, giving each other answers to things, which is what the community is all about. So I'm loving that. I'm also loving this quote, if looking at starting a design system is not scary, is it really a design system? I think that's a great question to ask. Is it? Because we all know that can be a quite scary thing. Right. So I think we also had, I saw somebody else from another place far away that I hadn't seen before. Oh, Singapore. That's what I wanted to say as well. We also have somebody in Singapore where it's in the middle of the night. So well done you from Singapore for being here and for staying awake. Right. So I've got all the speakers back. Thank you, all of you. Fantastic talks. How are you all feeling after that? Thumbs up. Great. Nodding heads. Brilliant. So we have quite a few questions to take us through. Some questions I think are mainly directed maybe at some talks specifically, and some questions are quite general. So I'm going to pick a few questions. I'm going to throw them out there and then we'll get going. For anyone watching, if you have follow-up questions on your questions, please feel free to share those as well. We try to get through as many as we possibly can. So one good place to start, and this probably I think is a question for everybody. How large is your design system team, and is it enough, or do you experience bottlenecks? Who wants to pick that question up first? In that case, I'm going to volunteer you, Ellis. How large is the team, and do you feel, is the team big enough, or do you experience bottlenecks, or how is that working?
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky to have good funding. We've got, I think we've got 8 or 9 engineers and 5 designers. and then myself and a business analyst as well. And we also have a sister team, which is a render. It's called NewsKit Render, and they build out actual solutions using the design system. So things like account or checkout or those kind of things. And they've got 4 engineers in that team. So yeah, we're pretty lucky.
You definitely lucky that you got a great sized team. That sounds fantastic. I'm going to come back to you being a PM at the design system, because you mentioned it yourself in your talk. And when I spoke to you last time, I also mentioned this. That's not been very common. So I'm definitely come back to that. Before we do that, Marta, how big is your team? And do you find that you have enough people, or are you guys struggling?
We have I think 3 designers that work on design system, and then we have a front-end team of around 10 people, and we all work either on the product or on the design system implementation. But we recently hired a design system engineer, so we are growing the focus on the design system for sure.
So part of your team are working across both, but you're starting to sort of get people who are going to be focusing mainly on design system. That's awesome to hear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. James and Emily working on the Zego team.
So at Zego, we don't really have a design system team per se. And obviously James has already done all of the design legwork, but in terms of building it, that will be managed by one of the squads, and I'll be kind of the connected designer to that squad I think we have 3 engineers on that squad building it. So I'll support them as they build it. And then if there's anything we need to modify going forward, then that will fall with me as the sole designer. Brilliant.
Cool. Actually, that brings me to my next question, which I think goes nicely into that, Emily and James. This is for you guys. So, obviously, we hear from 2 designers on this, but we also know that to get proper buy-in and getting people to really adopt the design system, we also need to have buy-in from engineers. So how are you guys working with the engineering team to make sure that sort of handover or the buy-in is happening as well?
I don't know if you want to start with that, James, with the initial convos you had as you were building it.
Yeah, no, I mean, from my perspective, obviously, we spoke with engineers as we started the process, and I think it's very much just about selling it to them as how easy it's going to make their lives. Obviously, we've touched on it with talks here about you're building solutions once, essentially, which ultimately means maintenance is easier and so on. So yeah, it was. From my side, it was that initial kind of getting them on board as to what they stood to gain from it, but also using them kind of the knowledge from their side as to what they would maybe be expecting or wanting or needing for the design system and the work that we were then providing in terms of specific requirements and documentation and stuff like that.
So I know for a fact that you guys had quite a lot of conversations with the engineering team, and I know that there was somebody from engineering who was kind of also leading the adaptation from engineering perspective. Is that correct? Yeah, so there was Gareth who was initially leading the engineering side of things. So we kind of spoke and collaborated and did some initial kind of discussions on how we kind of thought ownership and process structures might come into play. And yeah, just trying to make sure that we had some alignment on that, at least going forward. Fantastic. Marta, from your perspective, being an engineer, what's sort of your relationship with how does that look in your team, that relationship between designers and engineer? You were touching a little bit on it on your talk.
Yeah, we try to sync. We have a weekly sync between designers and engineers, and we always designers try to gather some feedback from us, and we have a pretty transparent communication. So I think that's the most important thing for us. Yeah. Awesome, great. So I guess this is sort of about a little bit about adoption and how people are sort of taking on to the design system. So I want to move on a little bit to talk about how do you measure adoption. And Ellis, you mentioned a few different things from a KPI NPS perspective.
but how do you actually measure adoption of components, or have you guys done any work around that?
Yeah, so the different levels, I think, and I think, crudely, you can just look at the number of products, not brands, but number of products that have actually adopted your system to kind of get a flavor of how well adopted it is. But then, you want to maybe scratch a bit deeper. And then I can see in the chat, people have already been posting up around like the Grafana, like plugins and things. And, we're looking into that at the moment. So the idea is that whenever, we'll know exactly as a percentage how well adopted it will be in a code base, for example, in the Times, for example, how much of their estate is going to be built using UseKit. But then also, in design, I know Figma has a really cool plugin as well, where you can track the Figma component usage, so you can see how many times a component has been dropped onto a design. So I think there's different levels that you can look at it, and we're doing the Figma thing. We're doing obviously the product count, but we're now looking into getting some kind of tracker in the other brands' code bases.
Fantastic. I don't know. I know that maybe James and Emily, your team might be a little bit behind in the development comparison to what Ellis's team is. But are there any plans on measuring, or is that sort of something that's in the future for you at the moment, to kind of try and understand how the usage of the design system components are happening?
Yeah, I guess ours is probably quite a unique scenario as well, that it's not it's not a whole rebrand. So we're taking quite a strategic approach in how we're going to start rolling it out and implement it across all of our journeys and websites. So we're kind of just going to take a strategic approach on where it's going to benefit best first, and start rolling it out that way rather than trying to do everything at once. Yeah.
Fantastic. We have a question here about usability, accessibility. Obviously, a very interesting and very important part of it. So I guess this is a question for all of you ultimately. Are you sort of including testing of the components when it comes to usability and accessibility? And if you are, how are you doing that? Want to start with Marta this time?
Sure. Yeah, we include some accessibility features on our unit testing, but we have a team focused on UX development, and they conduct some UX testing, and that really helps us on understanding the user and the flow in our application.
Great, awesome. And Ellis, from your perspective, what are you guys doing or planning for testing accessibility?
Yeah, so we have a tool. We use AppyTool to test our components from a visual standpoint. And then we also go through a kind of, when we're speccing out a component, so if we're building a select component, for example, we'll do like an accessibility audit before even speccing out the component to make sure that what we're going to build is accessible. And then we also have one of our engineers is an accessibility champion. He's kind of looking at the accessibility to make sure that whatever we ship is accessible. But, feedback all the time, especially from our American colleagues, is that, I think they are much hotter on accessibility than us over here. So we get a lot of good feedback from them as well.
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely. James and Emily, what's the effort from the Zego team?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, when we're building our components, we follow a lot of the kind of best practice things. We keep a lot of the patterns of our components kind of close to a lot of the native components behaviors, and then obviously we always do our double checks of the color contrasts. One of our kind of unending struggles was really about like incorporating brand colors and trying to balance that with accessibility. So that was quite a delicate thing to have to solve, but it's been something that we've been just trying to obviously track and keep a handle on as we've been going through.
I know that very well. Brands are very protective, but then at the same time, there is finding a balance between that brand and usability, accessibility is super important. So obviously with all the development of components and sort of moving the design system forwards, there is a lot of design history. Do you have sort of design history to keep track of design decisions or rationale that you made? Or if you are, how are you doing that? Is that part of the online open source that you have, or where does the history of the development of the design system live? Ellis, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so I think we've just today released version 4.3 or something of our design system. So, we're probably going to do 5 in a couple of weeks, to be honest. But yeah, we're building into our website at the moment a way to be able to track, and for a user who's on V1, for example, they can go in there and they can then look at the documentation of the design system at that point in time. At the moment, we crudely keep everything in Confluence because we haven't built that into the site yet. Things have taken other priorities, so that is high up our list of to-dos, which we need to get done.
I think that's fantastic. You mentioned that in your talk earlier, that that's something that you guys are going to be allowing people to do. So that's exciting. James and Emily, I know that the documentation is extremely important, and James, you are a champion of documentation. How are you guys looking at the history and being able to look back on the development?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, again, ours isn't necessarily at the advanced level where we'd have it within its own site. So at the minute, a lot of documentation sits within Notion, but we obviously go through all of the kind of different foundational aspects of the design system or of components and what sort of influence decisions and why certain decisions have been taken. And then obviously, just like from a Figma side, we still obviously house kind of an archive of lots of previous versions of components or of screens or whatever, just so if we ever need to go back to them or whatever, they're always there.
Great. And Marta, does your team keep log of changes?
Yeah, I can't speak from the designer side. I'm not much aware of that, but we keep a log from that sync that I was talking about before. So we have a document where we log and take notes from every meeting of every decision we take. So I think that can be considered a history of our decisions.
Absolutely, awesome. I wanted to move over a little bit because Ellis, I'm quite fascinated by this, and I'm sure that there are people out there as well. You mentioned it yourself in your talk. It's quite unusual, your role. So we have engineers here that are involved in the design system. We have designers who are involved in the design system. It's quite unusual for design system, as much as we have been over the last few years, trying to convince everyone that it's a product and that it needs its own team, etc. How did you guys manage to achieve a level of where you actually have a product manager for the design system itself?
Yeah, it is odd. Like, not odd, but I think it's unusual. But I think, in a company like News Corp, they own dozens of brands, and it is quite messy and quite political, in the sense that there's loads going on all the time, everywhere. So I think the product manager role at News UK in the design system is really looking at, aligning roadmaps to make sure that, how are we prioritizing the build of a component or a feature within the design system. And, if the Times and Wireless are both wanting to build a new audio player for maybe in article audio playback, it might be that, that helps inform our roadmap to then decide that we are going to build that in the next quarter. And it kind of helps, shield the team from the other stuff going on as well that maybe they don't want to get into. But all at the same time, we are, as I mentioned, we've got 3 NewsKit products. We've got the design system, we've got a render team who build out whole solutions, and we've got an API product as well. So the render product is like a consumer of the design system, but it's a sister team, so it works more closely than other teams. So that team is a product team. That team is developing web products. So it kind of all fits together quite nicely. And, maybe in a small organization with less brands, it probably won't be needed. But in a company like News UK, News Corp, it's I think it's definitely appreciated from the engineers and the designers. I hope anyway. Maybe.
So the size of the organization has sort of helped justify that role or the existence of that team.
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. I think there will be many people here who will be looking at that going, oh, I wish we could have our own team set up in that scenario. That would be amazing. So just touching a little bit again on measuring success. So I think the other thing as well is the topic that you were talking about, Ellis, about KPIs within sort of actually. So we have, as designers, we have tried to get a place at the table. As design systems, we have tried to justify the need for it amongst people and the value of it. And now that has happened, we now need to then start actually showing the value of it with numbers. And we have one question here, which I think is very related to this. Or it's to everybody, but I'm going to start with you, Ellis. Do you guys have any sort of numbers or studies or tracking the efficiency gained on design and front-end sides? So for example, we've seen an increase of certain percentage or time saved or engineering time saved, etc.
Yeah, we do. And I'll go back to, what I mentioned in my talk about different ways of adoption. So you've got maybe a more wholesale adoption where a new product is built entirely using the design system, which is obviously brilliant for us. And you've got the other way where people like The Sun, for example, they are incrementally adopting it. So when they build out new features, when they build out a new index page or an article page, they're using the components in the system to then build that. So I think, as I mentioned, you can't compare apples with oranges. They're two completely different ways of using the system. And I think that, with the Virgin Radio product, their next product they're going to be launching will be Talk Radio. It's the exact same platform. They're using our theming system. So then we can take the money saved, which is what, the CFO is going to really
absolutely
care about. And rather than spend 6 months building this new radio station, they've maybe spent 3 weeks or 4 weeks doing that. So that's really clear and simple cost saving straight away. And then, with The Sun, for example, they're incrementally adopting it. We'd hope to see then the core web vitals from Google improve and the accessibility score improve and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how we're approaching that.
Excellent. And Marta, from your perspective and engineering team wise, sort of have you seen or do you measure at all sort of the time saved here?
Yeah, I don't have concrete numbers, but I can say for sure that it saves a lot of time, because every time we want to build a new page or a new feature, it is so much easier to reuse components than being implementing all over again. And sometimes it's not even only the visual side of it, it's validations or logic inside the components. So it's much more easier, quicker, and reliable to just use the component that we know that is already implemented and tested and it's error proof than to implement everything from scratch.
Thank you. Awesome. I know, James and Emily, you guys actually mentioned in your talk about the increased speed and that everyone is adopting it. So I'm going to ask you guys another question. So we've sort of heard from you, from your side, of the things that you guys were worried about at the beginning of the process and at the beginning of the handover. You touched a little bit about where you are now, but James, you said there is 1 week left on this project, or sort of next Friday. What's going from your sides? What going through your heads at the moment? What are you concerning yourself the most with?
I mean, I can give my answer first. I suppose it's not necessarily being worried. It's more a case of, obviously, I think we're in a really good place with it, but I think it's understanding that this is kind of just the end of one phase, the kind of initial phase of the design system, and that next phase that involves, engineering is going to come with a lot of new kind of challenges and considerations. And that was obviously why it was really important that Emily feels comfortable with the design system in its current state, because it's going to be basically like reintroducing it again to a whole host of engineers, which is, as I say, is going to have a whole heap of new questions and challenges.
Yeah, for me, it kind of feels like when James leaves the project next week, the training wheels are off and I'm on my own. And I've kind of just said to myself, it's going to be a bit of a steep learning curve, and I've accepted that. I think that's natural and expected. And if it wasn't, then we were probably missing something. So I think, it's just, we've laid all the foundations that we've shared. I know all of the rationale, and it's exciting to take it forward into the next phase. But it's really important to me that I carry it on with the trajectory that it's had up until this point. As I said in the presentation, I know that this is James's baby, and I want to make sure that I look after it and keep it in the gorgeous form that it is now. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Awesome. I think that leads on to one of the questions that we have here on the slide deck, which is actually talking about what important is to consider when you're trying to incorporate components designed by another product team into your design system, or even that sort of adoption or encouraging contributions that I think, Ellis, you mentioned it in your talk as well, about sort of encouraging contribution from other people. But what are some important things from everybody here that you think that we need to consider when we're incorporating things that we didn't design but somebody else did? Emily, I'm going to start with you, considering you are taking over something that somebody else has been working on.
Yeah. And this is where it goes back to me being very protective of it, that it's really important to me that we allow collaboration, and that if we need something new that we don't have in the design system, any designer can design it, but it's balancing that with protecting the integrity of the design system and keeping that as like the ultimate source of truth and the Bible. So I guess, it's just working with the designers where I think it's important to give them the freedom. So if they've kind of highlighted and established that something's missing, that they know the problem that they need to solve with that, so to go away and make it. But then we've kind of, as our governance process, that there's a funnel that it has to go through me in order to check. Again, it goes back to all the rationale of understanding all the rules around spacing and things, just more of a kind of a validation and a QA check. And then it will be solely me adding to the design system going forward. So I won't necessarily be the only designer designing the bits, but I'll be the only one that's then moving them and adding them, again, just to protect things like the naming conventions and make sure that everything works the way it should do. So
I think that's an interesting and important point, that contribution should be open for everybody, and it's not about sort of safeguarding who can contribute. It's more a question of trying to make sure that contribution is done, and then that it ends up in a good place in the design system. Ellis, from your side, how are your team working with that? Because obviously you've got there's many teams and there's a lot of contributions happening. How do you work with that?
Yeah, so if we've obviously only got a limited resource, albeit it is big, but we can't build everything at once. So part of that prioritization kind of process is, do more than one brand or product team need this component? And we build it. And if not, we always do encourage them to build, and contribute back. However, whilst I did say this design system isn't ours, we don't own it, but we do govern it. So I think it's really important to make sure that our standards are adhered to. Otherwise, I think you'll end up in a position, in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, where you need another design system because your one's become so crazy and not fit for purpose. So you need to keep hold of your core principles and don't, you can't compromise on quality.
Absolutely. Fair point. One question here, and I'm going to start directing this one to you here, Marta. So assuming that a team or a squad build components that don't necessarily go into the design system straight away, might it be lack of time, etc. Do you guys keep sort of non-design system work visible that might go into a design system later, or like might be harvested for the design system at a different point?
Yeah, definitely. We have two products that share the same design system, and we have some components or features implemented in each project that are not part of the design system, and we are doing the work of porting those features from the product to the design system, and we only do that generic work around the component afterwards. So we pick the component and make it part of the design system and generic enough to be used on both projects. any updates of the design system to break the implementation of the project? Yeah, that is a big pain point. So I think type checking is our best friend. So we use TypeScript, and we can catch early errors of properties that we are not expecting or we started to have. So TypeScript and type checking is a really big help, and also having enough tests. So if we have tests covering our application, or at least the most important flows, it is a security net that we have, that if we upgrade our package, our design system, it isn't breaking the product at all.
Great, awesome. We are running out of time very quickly, and there are so many questions, and I could continue this conversation forever. But I am going to wrap up with one last question. And actually, Ellis, I'm going to ask you this question. So you were talking about the NPS, or the Net Promoter Score, and how have you seen the sentiment towards new kits, towards that change over time as the adoption has increased?
Yeah. When we first launched, I think we kind of got a bit excited, and we had our product Times Radio, which the Times team with Wireless built. And it was when NewsKit was only about a year old, and it was in its infancy, and it was, it worked. We got over the line, but there were a lot of headaches and a lot of problems to be sorted out. And the sentiment and the promoter score to NewsKit then was poor. It wasn't good at all. So using the feedback and the recommendations that were given to us as part of that feedback survey, we adapted and adopted different things to make the system more robust or better. And as more products have adopted it and we've become a more resilient system, the feedback has got better over time. Users is the key thing here. More users means you get more feedback, which means you can improve it more. So yeah, it's definitely in the right direction so far.
Great, very, very good to hear. Fantastic, awesome. That's all the questions we have time for today. There are a couple of questions that we didn't get to answer. One of them I'm just going to pick up quickly here. How do you get a feedback or concern regarding your components from the design community and your companies? I think that question has sort of been answered through other answers. So I'm hoping whoever asked that feels satisfied with that. And then I think there was one question as well. How do you find the best justified design system for value-driven product team? I want to go back to what Benny said here and what you guys have talked about as well, about the speed and saving time and streamlining. So I think that covers all those questions. I want to say thank you to the speakers for fantastic presentations and for some great answers. I can see here from the chat as well that people are very happy with the answers. It's nice to hear that people out there have similar approaches. For me personally, I always find it's great to hear that other people have the same struggles as you do, because it feels less of a mountain when you understand that, oh, we're not the only team who have these issues. So these community sessions are fantastic to kind of sharing those things. So thank you so much, speakers, for your talks and for your questions, answering those questions. To everybody out there, thank you so much for your great questions. We are going to wrap up. But before we do that, I need to give some shout out and thanks before we do that. Also, I want to say hi and to greetings from Ukraine, because we have one last sort of hello from a location. So I thought we need to mention that as well. I want to say thank you to everybody who took the time to join us on the live stream, and for your great questions and for the great chat and for the great topics. You can continue the conversation either on a meetup group or in this chat, because I think that chat actually stays up there. I want to say again, thank you to the speakers. I want to say thank you to YLD for organizing, and to our DSL people behind the scene who has worked hard to make this happen. We will be back in 2022. Maybe, who knows, we might be back in person. It all depends. It kind of seems to go, one day seems possible, the next day is impossible. So we'll keep on that. But one thing we do know is that we will definitely be back online. So that's for sure. There will be something coming out on Meetup very soon on when the next one will be. If you are interested in speaking, and if you think, you know what, I'm ready to give my talk at the next one, because I've got some comments that I want to make to the community, please absolutely do so. We would love to have you applying. There will be a form coming out very shortly. That will be a Meetup as well. We would also like to have your feedback from anybody who watched this, just to get an understanding how we can improve. So I think that one has just been shared in the chat. I will also go out with the follow-up Meetup email. And that is it for today, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, again. It's been fantastic. That's it. Signing off, and see you all at the next talk